Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you, and I want to remind you, as always, that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only, does not constitute working with a mental health professional. I do strongly suggest you find a professional in your area to work on your unique issues. And don't forget that also telehealth also is an option if you can't get or find somebody in your immediate area. You might be able to find them in your state. So today's guests, well, let's see here. I first actually happened to see them on another one of the other TTRP web shows I had been watching, and this one was done by London Carlisle, who has been on the show as well. And I had seen them, and there was always a note at the time that it's like, okay, I need to go and find this person for to have him on the show, as I enjoyed talking and hearing about how he played in the story. And I think it was the Contender story that was the one that he was doing with London.
It was a what is the name of that game again?
It was
a Harlem Bound game. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the Love and Contender story that London was doing. And then lo and behold, when I go to Big Bad Con back in 2023, who happens to sit down next to where I was and was talking to other people, but this person. And I had also lost the contact information for him because I had also taken myself off of Twitter when certain other forces had taken over. So I just sort of resigned myself to that. But again, here's the serendipity of this person sits down right next to me. And who this person is Brandonobrien. And Brandon is a writer, performance poet, teaching artist, and game designer from Trinidad and Tobago. His work has been shortlisted for the 2014 and 2015 Small Axe, that's AXE, literary competitions, and the 2020 Ignite Award for Best in Speculative Poetry, and is published in Uncanny Magazine, Fireside Magazine, Strange Horizons, and New Worlds. Old Ways, New Worlds, Old Ways, and Spectacular. Sorry, this moment my headphones are speaking in my ears saying their battery's low, so I'm just going to take them off, and we can continue with this. Speculative Tales from the Caribbean, among others. He is the former poet editor of the FIYAH and magazine of Black Speculative Fiction.
That's fire.
His debut poetry collection, Can You Sign My Tentacle, is available from Interstellar Flight Press and is the winner of the 2022 Elgin Award. Hello, Brandon.
Hi. Hello.
And how
I'm
are
glad
you doing?
to be here. I'm good. It's very warm where I am right now, but other than that, I'm doing quite well. I'm excited for us to finally get a chance to chat. For like a backstage conversation for everyone listening. We have been attempting to email to make this happen for the better part of 2 months, only to realize some of our emails are just kind of disappearing.
Yeah, something was up with the filters.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but now it's happening. So I'm glad to be here.
Exactly. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it. Would have loved to have had this for February for sort of Black History celebration month, but hey, you guys you're getting March, so
yeah, we'll take as much space as we can.
Exactly. Well, we're pretty much we are essentially of the African diaspora year round, so we're going to continue that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, as I always ask everybody, how did you get here?
I got here by being annoying about writing, I guess. A story that I like to tell because it's still funny, but the older I get, the weirder I feel. about the fact that it is still funny,
Mm-hmm.
is that in high school, I used to really like writing. Even before I would write for fun. And
Mm-hmm.
even when I was very young, I told myself that writing was the thing that I wanted to do with my life. Even before I knew what that meant, I just enjoyed writing and wanted to figure out how to make that a career.
Mm-hmm.
And in high school, I went to an all boys high school in Trinidad called Trinity College East, where after I had essentially dropped out of a class and was just mandated to still be in that class, so everyone knew where I was for 2 periods.
Mm-hmm.
I idly started writing a poem. I can't even remember which one, but I remember very vividly a boy asking me if I would write a poem for him to use to get a girl's attention in the school
Uh,
next to ours, and I was like, this is a bad idea. Then he goes, I'll give you $20. And I immediately did it. I immediately caved. And that became a brief mini career in high school that I would write poems for guys to use for girls I'd never met who I shouldn't be describing in these poems because I have no idea who they are. And while that's not the thing that I think helped me realize that this could be a career, it is one of the moments where I realized, hey, writing is a career no matter what you do with it, but it's
mm-hmm.
also very important for you to think about what you're doing with it because there's gonna come a point in time where you're gonna have to answer for the thing that you've made. Um, so that spiraled into doing spoken word for
Mm-hmm.
the majority of my high school life and into early adulthood, which went into writing science fiction and fantasy, getting published, becoming the poetry editor for Fire. Um, and that kind of like slid through the back door of also writing and designing TTRPGs as well, which is
Mm-hmm.
also a thing that I do now. And all of that because when I was very young, I did a thing because I really enjoyed it, and no one pressured me out of it or told me, "No, you're not gonna make money doing this thing." I still remember very vividly the day an English teacher that was not even my English teacher um discovered some of the poems that I wrote, and then called me aside after class and told me, "Make sure to keep these because one of these days you're gonna get published." And I'm like,
Mm.
I wasn't thinking about it at that time. I was like, when he told me, I was like, I don't believe you. I'm just writing these for fun. And now I'm here. And I guess part of that is because people believed in me even when I wasn't even thinking that this was supposed to be a thing. When I was just doing it because I enjoyed it, people believed that it would be valuable to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also counter to the story and narrative we hear so often around the idea of your creativity in a nature and society that wants us to be, oh, making sure we got the roof over our heads and being the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, which there's nothing wrong with those, but we can't help have our society be only those 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's still very hard. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
when people tell you that being a creative is a difficult path to take, they're not wrong. Um, but it's more radical to tell people, especially very young people, that
Mm-hmm.
it will be hard, but it is worthwhile and we want to see you make it,
Mm-hmm.
then it's harder than just being a doctor or a lawyer. So just be a doctor or a lawyer. Because one, that shit's still hard.
Mm-hmm.
And two, helping people value the thing that they want to do is going to make sure that they're always the person that they want to be, because I'm sure this is just me like assuming, to be fair. I'm not trying to be hostile to doctors or lawyers. They're doing good
Mm-hmm.
work, but I'm sure a non-0% of those people are young people who are like, well, since I'm not doing the thing that I want to do, since I'm not doing a thing that I actually enjoy, I have learned that money is the value of my
Mm-hmm.
existence on this planet. And my goal here is to continue making as much of it as possible and continue ensuring that people love me as long as possible by ensuring that I have enough money that makes me
Mm-hmm.
worthy of it. And that's bad for them too. It's bad for all of their interactions because all of their interactions are viewed through that lens as well. But it's bad for them because people start believing that's the only lens to view people through, and it's not fair to those professions as well. Because there are lots of doctors and lawyers who do the things that they do because they love it, and because even if it were hard, they would rather not do anything but that thing.
And we've already got a lot of issues probably going, depending on how you're viewing them, a lot of issues right now we're dealing in the world because that thinking has been so prevalent.
Yeah. When you encourage people in general, when you encourage people to do work that is necessary, because that work is valuable and because their desire is valuable, you get people who wake up every morning because they like what they do. And the alternative is inherently hostile. Like, you don't want your doctor being tired or exhausted or frustrated.
Or not
You don't want.
to you.
Yeah. Like, that's like one of the main things, right? Like, there was this large period during the COVID lockdowns, for instance, where like there was this seeming epidemic of nurses complaining on social media about the circumstances that they were working in. And to be fair, a lot of those frustrations were fair. But when people were pushing back to that, a lot of that pushback was natively, if doing this kind of work, if meeting these kinds of people, meeting people at their lowest and weakest versions of themselves, is cause for frustration or laughter from you, maybe you shouldn't be doing this because that's not what they deserve. And also, you could just be doing the thing that makes you happy, so we never have to hear about you complaining on TikTok. And I think I think the elements of society that tell us that the only way that we can function is by making sure we're making enough money and not by making sure that we're making enough value, is not only risking the lives of the people who require certain kinds of work from highly skilled individuals in order to survive, in order to pay their own way through life, in order to not suffer. Not only do those people deserve better, but the people in those fields deserve to want to be there so that their skill is being applied as faithfully and deeply as possible.
Yeah, because that's one of those issues, especially as a therapist, that I've heard many of my colleagues in the field have basically washed out, burned out. One of my colleagues, he didn't end up leaving the field at this time, but during the pandemic, he was thinking about leaving therapy and becoming a baker. And it's just like, nope, he didn't end up doing it, but it's like there was a very solid point where he was ready to do that.
Yeah. Like, the thing that is big for me now, post-pandemic, is actually teachers. There was a very brief time in high school where I told myself if I didn't become a writer, I would become a teacher. And then I realized, as a kid, I don't want to deal with more young people. Do I think I have this talent as an adult? But I still admire teachers because obviously a lot of how I am who I am right now is because I had really good teachers. One of the jokes that I tell people a lot is when I was in high school, I had a Spanish teacher that I liked as a person so deeply that I became better at Spanish because I wanted to impress her. And the minute I lost her, I lost all interest in Spanish. It just kind of dropped out of my brain because I never had a teacher that I felt so deeply connected to as a person, as them. And young people kind of need those because teachers are, for the majority of a young person's life, the adults that they will actually be interacting with the most. And they're just like during the pandemic with nurses, there is now a minor cottage industry on social media of teachers complaining about the education level or the discipline level of students coming out of the pandemic. And we knew that the pandemic was going to throw a lot of those things off for a lot of teachers. But the thing that stuck with me watching a lot of those videos is, and again, not to be mean to those teachers, but your job is to find the way through this problem. Yes, there are difficulties that are making this hard for you, and it's the rest of society's job to make sure that those problems are solved, to make sure that schools are properly equipped and properly funded. The discipline issues are a large part parental issues, obviously. There is a growing concern about social media in young people's lives that can be resolved in the home. But the education problem, at some point, a teacher has to go, yeah, somebody let this kid down at some point educationally. It's my job to either get them back up or know that this kid is never going to succeed ever again. What am I going to do about that? As it becomes kind of frustrating to see a lot of teachers then go, these kids need more, and I am not in the mood to give it to them, because it means that in the future, we're just going to have so many teachers burn out that we're kind of going to we're going to run into a situation where schools run out of teachers, and it's just a place, it will become essentially a minor security prison for being a teenager.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to solve those things, but I mean, somebody has to, because we need more teachers who are teachers because they like teaching despite the conflicts and are willing to go past those conflicts for the sake of the young people who will suffer for the rest of their lives without it, through no fault of their own, because their minds are developing.
And how our society will also, in many cases, devolve because of it as well.
Yeah. There will come a point where the majority generation of our future will be the people who are going to school now. And if we're not resolving some of those issues for them now, then they're gonna set the standard for the future. And then we're just gonna say the humanities become stupid, instead of going, humanity gave up on itself, gave up on its youngers, which is far more drastic to me.
Which, you know, in its own strange way, kind of really describes some of the issues that we find in cosmic horror.
Oh God, yeah.
And dealing with the elder beings that are so much in a big part of cosmic horror.
So when I was doing my preliminary reading for Can You Sign My Tentacle, which is very strongly about Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos and the like tangential relationship between Lovecraft's work and blackness as a cultural phenomenon. I hadn't read a lot of Lovecraft before that point. I kind of made it a point that I didn't need to before I got there. And one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting, the thing that I think is most telling about Lovecraft, is that idea in the Cthulhu mythos. The thing that people ascribe so strongly to the Cthulhu mythos is this idea that there is this experience that is so grand and off-putting, this greater truth of the universe that is so big and unfathomable, that you kind of either have to give up learning about it or go mad in the learning of it. And what I found really fascinating is work that speaks to Lovecraft, where the response is, no, that's not how learning works. That's not how gaining knowledge works. Both of those things are a kind of giving up that is kind of unfair to the human experience. But also, particularly interesting is the album Splendor and Misery by Clipping, David Diggs' like noise rap band, where a large part of the like notes for that album are like, why do we care that this thing is a thing that we can know? Why do we care that this thing is bigger and more powerful than us? Some communities of people live in the universe knowing that things are bigger and grander and more powerful than them all the time and
Mm-hmm.
survive anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So why do I need to know this thing? And why do I need to base the future of my being on the capacity of this thing when it could just be a thing that is bigger than me and not my business,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not its business either, and we just go our separate ways. And when it comes to like how we operate in the world, like that has been a very freeing uh sense as well. Like there are so many things about how we try to survive, how we try to make sense of the parts of society that make no sense or feel like they exist specifically to cause us to suffer. And one of the things that I guess I kind of learned from that, and this is something I learned even after having written the entire book and just kind of sitting with that for a bit, was sometimes the way that we help each other, sometimes the way that we are available for each other is not about how do we destroy this system that is too powerful for us to destroy, but how do we make small parts of our inner world so secure that when people enter it, they don't need to think about the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about canceling student debt, although we should. The fact that it hasn't been canceled is evil. It's about how do we pool our resources to make the strain of debt easier for the people who will continue to struggle if no one did anything about it. How do we make sure that our kin are fed? How do we make sure that our kin are sheltered instead of constantly headbutting this large thing that we can't destroy? How do we make minor, similarly indestructible structures of ourselves and of our communities? And I still don't know a lot of how those things work. There are people who work in mutual aid that are far smarter in those regards than I am, and I envy them a great deal. But talking to those people and thinking about the minor things that they do, like how sometimes the fight is not about always going to court or always going to the town hall meeting, but simply making sure that there is a community fridge that's plugged in somewhere, is a big deal.
Very much so. And that standpoint of we've got teachers who can educate us and our kids for maintaining the world such as it is, but just so that we know that there's more in the world and heavens to enjoy.
Yeah. Like, people are going out of their way to make things available for us all the time, and we could make space for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. So, to that end, and as you're probably all wondering, what book are we talking about? We're talking about Can You Sign My Tentacle? Which was mentioned, and the aspects that came up there. As you mentioned, H.P. Lovecraft was part of one who you had to do some studying on. And those who are not aware, he is the source of the idea of cosmic horror that exists as a genre setting in fiction, fantasy, and horror. But he was also highly racist. And there has been a large movement, probably in this last, 10 years, to start reclaiming the idea of cosmic horror as not just being his domain, but being all of our domains, which means also writing material and creating material that, while might still be cosmic horror, is not necessarily set to the guidelines he set at the beginning.
Yeah. And I do kind of want to speak to like this one other thing about Lovecraft, which another thing that like came up in the reading and the learning about Lovecraft when I was writing Can You Sign My Tentacle, which was I joke a lot in a lot of other interviews that I kind of pity Lovecraft at this point. And that sounds kind of cold, but I don't mean it in the kind of weakening or discounting sense, but I mean, there is this like deeper question that kind of comes up in thinking about Lovecraft this far ahead of his legacy, of the obvious fact that he was just a person of his circumstances in his world. And a lot of other people will kind of bring that up to say, well, he's a product of his time.
Mhm.
These things were happening all over the place. So that doesn't discount racism, first. But second, that acknowledgement makes it even more important to be critical of him, and makes a lot of his friends that we don't bring up in this conversation a great deal worse. Because the obvious question then becomes, what are his circumstances that empowered this to happen? And what does it mean that those circumstances were so presumably unchangeable that his attitude toward marginalized people didn't change until he was nearly dying? I think about this a lot because there is a singular poem in Can You Sign My Tentacle that is about Kanye West, which is perhaps my favorite among them, even though I read it very rarely, because like the standout thing about that poem is, would Kanye West be less of the person that we know him to be right now in the public eye? Would he be not only less abrasive, but healthier for himself if he was surrounded by people who were capable of challenging some of his behavior before it became publicly visible? If it wasn't always, oh, he's a celebrity, everything needs to happen online, and more his friends just pulling him to the side of the studio and going, hey, this is kind of weird, this is kind of sus, do you want to chill out a little bit? Nobody needs to know that this happened, we could just sit back and like have a drink and talk right now. I think because we have a lot of conversations about the fact that Kanye West is obviously struggling with a personality disorder, and it's not just the matter of that doesn't excuse his behavior. It's the matter of, you mean to tell me he's surrounded by dozens of people with money and resources, but also people who call themselves his friends before the money, who see a guy struggling with a personality disorder and will never go, hey, this is not for TMZ. We need to call this guy up to the house and just chill for 2 days and not be seen so we can check on our friend. And I feel the same way about Lovecraft ultimately. I wonder why he was in a circle of dozens of people who cared so deeply about him that they were in long handwritten letter chains that would date back months of just talking about the process of writing, and none of them would ever check him about any of his stuff, even when they saw that he was having those feelings in the throes of severe emotional distress. And how ultimately we are kind of socially creating these people, like socially making it unavoidable for certain kinds of people to be hostile in the world, because one of the things that comes easiest to us is just judging people for behaving in a certain way instead of being available for our friends and our loved ones when they behave in certain ways, because you know that if you were there to talk them out of this, they would be better for themselves. Like, at what point do we ask, did someone owe something to Lovecraft that would have made the future view Lovecraft better? In much the same way that I think about Kanye. So,
and I think the one you're talking about is Kanye West's internet bodyguard asked for Hastert to put away the phone.
Yes. I think the title alone just triggers so many things in my brain. Like, a lot of that was like, because that was before that I wrote that poem before some of the worst things had happened. I'm pretty sure that poem predates the like more violent messages that Kanye was issuing about Kim Kardashian and Pete Davidson. It was obviously before a lot of the anti-Semitic comments. This was just him beefing with Drake. This was just me going, this is not my business. It shouldn't be my business. Someone talk to Kanye, because it seems like he's having a moment on Twitter. And if someone called him and asked him if he needed somebody to talk to, he would probably have not said dozens of things on Twitter. And then everything else happened. And then I'm like, yeah, someone should still talk to him. It's been years. And someone should still talk to him. And I'm surprised why no one isn't. People like, I am afraid. One of the things that I guess it revealed about me is that I am afraid of what it would mean for me personally if I were ever like taken so deeply by a manic episode that I said something that I knew I would regret. And the people who say that they love me never called me moments afterward and go, hey, what's happening?
And that is a good story for a lot of mental health issues around the world.
Yeah.
And I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think there are, and I say this as someone who is pretty sure I'm 80% neurotypical. I have no idea what my diagnosis is. I'm pretty sure I deeply oscillate between a state of unwellness and a state of wellness. But I trust that I am so like stereotypically neurotypical that a lot of my fear is also that I am letting other people down in the exact same way. Because ultimately the worry is we live in a society that primarily conditions people who think that they are normal to think that people who are not normal, in scare quotes, no one's seeing the scare quotes, but people who are, quote, not normal, are bad or volatile or will blow up at a moment's notice in a way that will cause you harm, and therefore you must distance yourself from them. And perhaps there is the more compassionate perspective of maybe those things are true, and that's why you should be available for them, because the person who's going to blow up first is them. And if you care about them, you don't want that to happen. I hate the blow up analogy for obvious reasons, but if your friend were strapped to a bomb, I would like to think that you would want to defuse the bomb first and foremost, because you don't want your friend to die, even if it meant you would sacrifice yourself. And I would like to think that I would do that for people that I care about as well. But we live in a world that fears that consequence, because, I mean, in a lot of those circumstances, we imagine that they're going to be like terribly hostile, but most people suffering with mental illness are not immediate threats to other people in that way as much as they may be threats to themselves, which means that you knowing that is aiding and abetting a harm that you could prevent before the person who knows that they're gonna suffer that consequence actually suffers that consequence.
Very true. And that's some of the biggest work that we try to do with therapy, and try to find those who are willing to make the change. And if they're not willing to make the change, how can we at least keep them comfortable?
Yeah. I mean, the change is expensive as well.
Yeah.
Speaking as someone who cost himself out of therapy that he really needed at a brief moment in time. But when I had it, it was some of the most meaningful interactions that I was having, because it was really saving me from myself. It was helping me understand, hey, I was making a decision that was costing me my own comfort. Like, I still think very strongly about the time the therapist that I trusted the most at that point, because I was considering going to another, and then I realized, no, this guy is the guy that I need to go to. And the moment that I realized that I should stay with this therapist is the moment where I was like describing all of these frustrations that I was having with a particular part of my life, and he just closed his planner notebook that you all obviously really love, that one notebook that I'm sure you're imagining in your head.
As a dyslexic, I can't do that. So I don't. So I
Very
don't have
fair.
that planner book.
But he closed his planner and he simply lifted his head and said to me, you need to stop baffling yourself with bullshit. You need to stop bullshitting yourself and just say the thing that you're feeling very plainly. I'm like, am I not describing the exact feeling that I'm having to you? I thought I was. And then the process of actually saying aloud to myself the thing that I was avoiding saying aloud was when I was realizing, yes, that's what's happening here. I've wound myself so tightly. I'm avoiding things that I should know about how I feel. And if I hadn't, I would have probably done a lot of stupid things a couple of years ago, and I'm glad that I hadn't. And I'm glad that I had that experience. And ultimately, the thing that I regret the most as a result is having that revelation and then going, oh God, this is so expensive. I can't do this right now. I need to do this, but I can't do this right now. Especially because I'm sure this comes up a lot elsewhere. I'm sure other people have literally said this on the podcast, but the stigma of mental health among the Black diaspora community is such that I've had relatives literally walk up to me when they heard that I was going to therapy and can't afford to go anymore. And they looked at me like very meekly and despondently and went, so you can't talk to me? It's like, no. Why? And I can't tell them because I'm going to therapy to talk about you. Not because I don't love you or not because you were like evil or something like that, but because I need to work stuff out about our relationship in a place that is safer and less judgmental than this one, or else I wouldn't need to talk about this relationship.
And hence it brings us back to Kanye West's internet bodyguard asking Hastor to put away the phone.
Yeah.
And let me read this here, and then we're going to take a break. So, damn, this thing just loves to find something that means something, so it can swallow it in a swirling jaws and erase it all. He was just walking down a Twitter feed late one night, looking ironically for a hamburger, and he met the mess rushing upward on the sidewalk, swirling across the cold while some other VIP walks away chuckling. He takes out his phone to catch, in the entire internet. He spins a slick caption. Underneath to snare a couple likes as they crawl upwards. Hastor shouts, "World Star!" out of sight, a gleeful judgment sound. Luckily, no one will hear. Until it fades into the midnight. The whole block puts a part in their mouths, laughs their little laughs with their mouths full of, "Oh, he's so crazy." When I see it, I remember nearly passing out with my own desire to disappear. I remember the sidewalk of my own timeline rising up to meet my nose, and strangers kneel to ask if I was dizzy. Bringing tepid water, wiping my bloody forehead. I wonder if Ye brought any friends with him to the club. I wonder why no one's taken Ye to bed. I wonder why no one's taken Hastor's phone. I wonder why the street is always so full when World Star and aways so empty when World Weary. The video stops trending eventually. Maybe we'll think about it so we can redirect our judgment, feel better right after feeling bad, but the video will never come down. So we're going to take a break there, folks, and we'll be back here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, with author Brandon O'Brien. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist. Stay tuned as we explore more things: Cthulhu, mental health, maybe some TTRP, or just what it means to be a Black writer in the Caribbean. So stay tuned.
Enjoying our shows and can't get enough of us? Follow us on Instagram at Voice America Talk Radio and see what we're cooking up for you.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Tune in to the Voice America Variety channel on the Voice America Talk Radio Network. Voice America Variety broadcasts a diverse array of topics, reaching a global community. Our experts come from all walks of life, and the topics they discuss are everything from current events, arts and entertainment, leadership, parenting, relationships, self-improvement, career advice, and a variety of other topics. Check us out today. You're sure to find something of interest. Voice America Variety. Talk on today's hot topics.
We're on Facebook, along with some of the greatest minds of the world, and that includes you. Visit us on Facebook at Voice America Empowerment.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Brandon O'Brien, author, gamer. And we've reviewed from our last half. I was reading from Can You Sign My Tentacle? And we're reading the piece about Kanye West. But we're going to open up this half of our section with another reading from Can You Sign My Tentacle? Brandon, which one are you going to read for us?
I'm going to read one of the first poems in the collection, called Because Who She Is Matters More Than Her Words. There's a wolf prowling in the stalks outside a black woman's Twitter profile, gnawing at the bark of unsheathed pencils and waiting to leap at an unsuspecting neck. Moonlight strikes the head of a rocket statue to trigger the pack. They howl and scrape at the spines of scary galleys with names they gutturally mispronounce for fun. But the heroine of this story just takes her first draft and rolls it up, throws the dusk to dawn lights on outside the house that knows itself, and swats some of the tykes on their noses till they scatter. Her neighbor puts up a warning. The residents here ain't the ones. The next HOA meeting makes a fence of bodies, gathers its own nets, immunizes its own from fatal ideas, puts buckshot in the barrels of their fountain pens. We will hear about another pack before day even breaks, best believe. But even our kids will know. We'll put pebbles in their slingshots as warning. They will tell stories in the cafeteria about how their mothers were good with the blades of pens, how they learned how to hold one early, how nobody could ever tell them nothing about who they were. And one night, when harvest night calls for starving wolves, those children will reach for their mother's weapons and cast light like there is no night.
What is the impetus behind this one?
So, this, I remember vividly the moment that this poem was triggered in my brain, which was, I was watching the video live stream of one of the Hugo Awards. I can't remember which year it was. All I remember was N.K. Jemisin won Best Novel, which means that they could but won 3 years in a row. But I remember that I wasn't at Worldcon that year, so I was watching the Hugos via live stream that they had set up for everybody to watch. And a guy on a guest account on that streaming service immediately like starts getting irate. Like the moment Best Novel is announced, he's like, yeah, N.K. Jemisin is gonna win, but just because she's a black woman. I'm like, have you read anything that N.K. Jemisin has ever written? But like that impetus that just kind of rises out of other people, and it has happened since for dozens of other writers in the field. It's been happening since before I started writing. It'll continue to happen even afterward. Or one can hope that we rise above that habit, but we haven't yet. Is a thing that still follows marginalized writers all the time. It's a thing that like complicates people's relationship to the genre so deeply that there are marginalized readers who sometimes feel ashamed to say that they're like true fans of the genre because they don't want to suffer the kinds of annoying brutal natures of other fans on the internet about it.
Which becomes the problem of dealing with the people who are gatekeeping stuff, even though they don't really have that position.
That's the thing, right? Like, the weird thing about gatekeeping in the genre is, like, it's not your gate. You're standing outside the gate with me, telling me that the gate is closed for us both because you don't want me to get in. I'm like, don't you want us both to get in? Like, cool things are on the other side of the gate. And, like, I wanted to like immediately document the feeling of then watching Jemison's acceptance speech that night and going, yeah, this doesn't bother her. It's still obviously annoying and hurtful and bad, but like she still got a Hugo. And there is something kind of radical in knowing that ultimately your work can pay off in that sense, that even though you have to go through all of those slings and arrows of other people's distaste for your very presence, you can still provide value. People will still see that value. People still want you here. And people will still reward you for being here. That you can essentially create a society, create a genre society where people will eventually say, the people who gatekeep are the people who we don't want here. And I kind of just wanted to document that feeling for myself. At the time when I wrote that poem, I didn't even know I was gonna write a collection in the first place. So that was just for me, and then I realized that it fit here in this book, given the rest of the content of Can You Sign My Tentacle, that I wanted people to see. I wanted people to get the feeling that I wanted to keep for myself when I wrote it.
Beautiful. Which I think also goes into the stream I mentioned at the start of this, where I first saw you playing with London and playing Harlem Unbound, and you're playing a poet character there too. Oh, wait a minute. It wasn't The Love Continued. It was the one with the Black Tower and Azeroth's mirrors. That's what it was.
Yes. It was that one. That's a thing. I'm gonna be honest. A thing that I like a lot, because when I made that character for Harlem Unbound, I hadn't actually set myself up for any assumptions of anything else. I just wanted to make a guy who was good at getting in some kinds of conflict, because this was the first time I was playing Harlem Unbound. This is the first time that I was playing anything Call of Cthulhu themed. I knew that we were going to get in some violent situations. I just wanted to make sure I was equipped to get in a couple scraps. I hadn't thought about any of the characterization for my character up until that point. I was just making stuff up as I went along, because I was playing with people who I knew were good at RP. And obviously, because I'm not American, I can't draw on that historical touchstone either. So I'm trying to uh figure out what else I can rely on that makes my character feel realistic. And then there's a point where London, as the keeper, just kind of goes into, hey, everybody, do you want to perform a thing in this moment? I'm like, yeah, let's just go with that. Let's just see where this goes. And I just leaned into that, not knowing that I was going to lean into that initially. And it was actually kind of refreshing to know there's a thing that is a part of me that I can make a part of this character. Because I don't do it a lot, but when I do it, I like when I'm playing with friends to just go out of my way and say, yeah, this downtime moment, I'm just gonna write a poem. I'm not a poet. I'm like, it will happen when I'm not playing a bard in D&D and stuff like that. I'm like, this is just a thing that I do. Because when I'm not thinking about everything else, this is the thing that gives me joy. Because in real life, that is the thing that, for a lot of my life, was the thing that took me out of things that were intense and overwhelming. So being able to kind of attach that to other characters and make that also feel meaningful in that sense, because I'm essentially doing what I would do, was really rewarding in that moment.
Sweet.
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to be yourself in the game.
Well, I think that also, again, goes back to, especially my fellow therapists who use TTRPs, which is tabletop role-playing games, in the course of therapy, where that standpoint of every character we make has some element of who we are in it. And it's just what element is getting to step forward more so with the bard versus the gallant paladin or the sneaky rogue. Or in this case, we're dealing with the Cthulhu character tropes: the detective, the socialite, the occult scholar.
Yeah, like, I think, again, that was the first time that I played Call of Cthulhu, but I think that the thing that is standout when making and playing characters for that, other than like the interesting kind of temporal touchstone of, you are now visiting a time where, depending on who you are as you're playing, your life was hard, and now you're playing a version of yourself where those consequences are not real, but now you have to deal with other consequences, and what does that feel like? But I think that a lot of what makes that makes making a character in that sense kind of interesting is also a sense of, what kind of person could I have made myself in this space? Like, there is something like the idea that you play a socialite, the idea that you play somebody with that leverages social clout in Call of Cthulhu is interesting, because you're essentially playing a version of an influencer in a world where that level of attention had a lot more life and death stakes for people, where if you couldn't talk yourself out of a particularly tense situation with a cop or a gang member, it meant you or someone that you cared about would be seriously injured or lose your life. And like, trying to like visit the sense of, what do those stakes mean for me now when I'm just playing it, and how can I envision what those things can mean or teach me about doing this kind of work in the real world. What can being a detective teach me about being thoughtful and observant in circumstances where people are being harshly critical about my place in their world? What does being a soldier mean, coming back from, and like, I think a lot, especially when it comes to TTRPGs, there have been a lot of pieces written specifically about using Dungeons and Dragons in prisons as a means of rehabilitation. And obviously, folks have spoken a great deal about how it helps them recontextualize the act of being incarcerated, but also gives them an opportunity to be deeply expressive about being separated from or losing loved ones, how they actually feel about conflict and stuff like that. But I've been for the longest while wondering, has anyone used that exact same thing for veteran soldiers? Because I feel like they would get a lot of the same kind of value.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, like it just feels like the one place where a lot of good work could be being done, and it's either not being done or I haven't heard about it, because that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people deserve to hear about, because vets do a lot of risky things in the world. Often in circumstances where even the people who send them off to conflict don't really care about their well-being, and being able to give them an opportunity to process those feelings through a game that is designed specifically to consider armed conflict, I think would be obviously valuable to them in that way.
Yes, there are. I do not know any of the therapists who are running those groups, but I do know those groups do exist and they are working with veterans.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that they are. I think for all of the feelings that we may have about war as an aspect of society, the fact of the matter is there are still people being drafted or being personally drawn to conflict, and they need to find the means to find peace within themselves after that conflict is done. And this seems like a way to do it, to more deeply ask personal questions about one's relationship to those conflicts.
Yep. So it very much exists. So I would probably invite those who are more interested in that, check out Geek Therapists, or on YouTube, there's a group called Geeks Like Us. So it's geeks spelled with 3s instead of E's. If you're interested in starting to find out more about that. Just using gaming with therapy. If you also check, I think it was last year around this time, one of our others with Joseph Archer of Game Academy, working with neurodiverse children and such with gaming. So there is definitely work out there. It's just, again, not going to get the same show and display and influence that obviously we get from watching streams like you in London.
Yeah, like, I am glad that we have gotten to the point where this is a kind of theater, because ultimately that's what tabletop role-playing games are. It's like community theater for the audience of just your friends. And I appreciate that it's become more of an artistic expression, because it's also given a lot of people who don't think of themselves as performers opportunities to perform and gain more like improvisational skill and stuff like that. But I do think there is, while obviously the therapeutic value is in knowing that those communities are doing those things in private for themselves, where when something particularly serious comes up, they get to step aside and like have a serious conversation with someone who can actually help them process those feelings. I think it would also be dramatically helpful for society if, like, once a year, like as a one shot or something, like we showed some of those things live, that someone got to see prisoners play, somebody got to see veterans play. And I say this as somebody who, like, one of the most like radical experiences that I think I've ever witnessed, not personally for me, but knowing that it would be radical for somebody else, is like just before the pandemic, I was preparing for the National Poetry Slam here in Trinidad and Tobago, and realized that one of the other contestants was a prisoner, was someone who was literally still presently serving time. And people would ask him, while literally surrounded by guards, why he thought that this was a thing worth doing. You could be doing anything else. This is not really you standing backstage in in this university auditorium is not exactly the same as freedom. Why is this the thing that you wanted to do? And his answer was literally, poetry is the thing that made me realize that I don't want to go back to a life of crime. And I want to be able to simultaneously show people, hi, this is what a real criminal looks like. I'm not like a hardened, stubborn, broken person, but also that this art form that I appreciate can be an avenue for self-growth, can be an avenue for your not just your social uplift, but just an opportunity for you to be honest about yourself to yourself and other people. And I thought that was amazing, especially because he's also just very good. And the goal, obviously, when we show a lot of people a lot of these things, is we want the ideal audience to be present and go, that thing that you said was the value of it for you is also the value for me. And I hope that that's the value that somebody gets from him, in much the same way that I hope that someone who would consider joining the army or has just come back from the army and is struggling in ways that he hasn't been able to communicate to his loved ones, or a therapist can see someone else play D&D and go, okay, maybe that can help me. Or someone who has just come out of prison and has realized he's struggling with resources, struggling to reconnect with people who are struggling to reconnect with him, can find TTRPGs and go, this is a place where I can possibly find community. And I want everybody to be able to find any of those things with any of the things that can be found. Like, when I was a lot younger, I used to think that it was kind of stereotypical and hollow that people would always go into like quote unquote high risk areas and put up a basketball court and say, yeah, you could dribble a ball instead of going into a life of crime. And then as an adult, I was like, it's not about basketball. We're not saying basketball is going to change your life. We're saying having a place where you can constantly gather with your peers, where people like you and trust you, where you can do a thing regularly as a part of your routine that gives you joy. And when you need to talk to somebody, there is someone who is here who will be available to talk to you because they like you and trust you, will change people's lives in so many minor and seemingly unremarkable ways. And then when that person realizes that their life has changed, they will look back and go, the only thing that could have changed my life was this basketball court. But it's not the court. It's that at the court, I met people who could be there for me. Well, and that could be your comic book shop. That could be a library. That could be a knitting class for people who you'd never imagine would take up knitting, or a baking course that for people who you'd never imagine becoming like master chefs. But knowing that there's a place where you can go when you have nowhere else to go, and people who like you and trust you will make themselves emotionally available for you is all you need.
Which comes back to essentially the principle of who you surround yourself with is part of who and how you're going to move into the future. And you're surrounding yourselves with people who will allow for you to have the vulnerability, allow for you to have a different image of yourself that, as you said, isn't connected to crime, that is connected to the ability to write, is connected to the ability to draw, is connected to those who want to be doctors, want to be scientists, is very important. And in some ways, I think that's also one of the things that even with the stream you were on with London, and anytime we've been able to have these streams that are predominantly POC centered, is one of those examples. Those of us who like that environment and desire that, when we haven't been able to have that environment where we live, which is another of the advantages of being able to play games online with people who aren't necessarily in your immediate area. Like you did with that stream.
Yeah. Like, I think that especially when you're already marginalized, especially because that makes it harder for you to create community, because there is like this small, loud subset of people who want to make it more difficult for you to find places where you can be safe. The times when you can successfully make that kind of community are like inherently valuable to your continued mental health. And it's not even just like the obvious value when it's that POC have a place where they can gather together, that it's Black people have a place where they can gather together, or queer people have a place where they can gather together and do this thing, is valuable, obviously, because in the largest spaces of those like communities, it can often be difficult. But it's also just as valuable to know that even if the space is not a POC only space or a queer only space, that is a POC friendly space or a queer friendly space. Because then that's also people who are not marginalized going, no one's going to give you any shit here because we are here to stand up for you as well. And while I value POC spaces as a result for doing that, for giving us the opportunity to do that for ourselves, I think it's equally, if not more important, to have friendly spaces, because it's more important for people to let other people know what standing up looks like. Because again, it's not even necessarily that the people who hate us or don't want us to be here outnumber us. They don't. It's that the community that does outnumber us are the community of people who are like, I don't want to get into drama right now. So if drama is happening, I'm just going to let it be and leave. Even when somebody else's life or safety is at risk, when they know that if they did say something, it would immediately dissolve. Like, that's the real power a lot of people in the majority underestimate that they have. Because we all individually as individual objects of social inertia in the world, we all don't like conflict. I get that. I get that in the middle of the street, if you see two people fighting, you just don't want anything to do with that because you don't know what's going to happen to you if you get in the way of that fight. But if it's you and four of your buddies watching a fight where somebody is obviously weaker and being picked on, you know that any one of you saying something, just saying something, has the potential to stop that fight. And every time you don't, you're telling your friends and everybody else who doesn't want to get into conflict that not getting into conflict is better than stopping conflict. And we need to be better as communities, especially as nerdy communities, as communities that constantly present ourselves in the media as people who were once maligned, and now we are lucky in this point of the 21st century to no longer be the bullied ones. To be able to say, well, there are people in our communities that are still being bullied. Now that we're no longer the bullied ones, we can be the people who stop bullying. And I think both of those are important. I think it's important to have our own spaces where we know that we're standing up for ourselves and where we know that the space is constructed to be safe. But we kind of need allies to make other spaces for us so we can continue doing our work and we can make our work more public facing and we can reach more people and do the work better and hopefully be paid for the work because the work is still work. And know that people will stand up for us and stop the hostility from happening in the first place so we can get to the ideal future of this hostility stops happening, full stop.
Very much so. And that even is in the aspect of being able to have more games that are POC centered, but also just to have works, even like the materials of works that are coming out of the Caribbean by Black speculative writers as well.
Yeah. Like, people are making it out here. Like, I'm presently, like, I just finished the Tin House Winter Online Workshop. It was just going on this past week. And one of the things that I admired is that when I got in, I was like perfectly conscious of the fact that it's highly likely that I may be the only person from Trinidad doing this entire thing. I mean, it's an American literature workshop. Chances are a lot of locals, a lot of LA folks, New York folks are gonna sign up. Like outwardly petitioning for people who write from these spaces is just gonna snap up a lot of um uh white cis persons living in the US who want to do the thing. And then I like went to the like opening like reception thing that we were having on Zoom for the event, and the host was listing all of the countries that people had applied to Tin House from, and I was like, a lot of Latin America is here. Not a great deal, but we're here. People are seeing like Spanish speaking and English speaking Caribbean folks in their groups. Obviously there are a lot of queer Americans in those groups as well. People are asking lots of questions about reading outside of their space. People are giving lots of very widely read suggestions of the things that they're reading, so people can broaden their horizons outside of the assumptions of the things that they've already read. I'm like, y'all trying your best to do the work. I appreciate that. There is still obviously a lot more to do. But doing is part of the doing, I guess. Knowing that they can make space for me, and that part of that making space for me is also making space to read like I read and read like my peers read, to read from my region, to read from other regions, to ask me to read from regions that I would otherwise not consider similarly marginalized, is part of the radical work of widening the genre, and I appreciate being a part of spaces that continue to do that.
Excellent. Which is part of what we also found at Big Bad Con, and which is why hopefully I can get a ticket to it next year. I know I'm looking forward to the digital one that's coming up.
Like Big Bad Con is actually a very crucial example to me, and I'm very, very grateful that we got to meet at Big Bad in that way. Because Big Bad Con is walking the walk, as it were. They like for the longest while have gone out of their way to specifically ensure that not just people of color, but people of color from outside the US who would otherwise specifically struggle, not just to attend, but to travel, to be able to justify not doing another thing for 4 days to be physically present for this thing, to make room for them to be present, is part of the work, because there are otherwise very talented people who live in the Caribbean, who live in Southeast Asia, who mightn't speak English as their primary language as well, who, if they weren't uniquely provided with the opportunity to be present, would not be able to justify 4 days off work to promote one game to a handful of people who aren't going to like really care ultimately. So it's not just that they are seeking these people out, it's not just that they're paying for them to come, it's that when they get there, they're getting mentoring, there's an entire session dedicated to making sure that they could hopefully make networking connections with people with professional relationships in the industry so they could get work and get paid. It's making sure people hear about the work that the games that they're making and the work that they're making, so that the already cool things that those designers are making can also just get sold, and people can also know that they're making their own unique work and that they can support those creators' unique work as well. And I think a lot more industries could do a lot more to prioritize people in that exact same way. Like, I like writing science fiction and fantasy, and I like it when science fiction and fantasy goes out of its way to make sure that someone can attend a convention, or that the fee to join a certain industry community space is discounted or waived. Those things are useful. But you know what people really need? Work.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of need to pay my bills as well. And like, especially in writing, especially in a field where the ultimate value is what is the story that you are telling. We do need more to be done in SFF that is less about making sure that POC are present and more about making sure that the majority actually reads the stories that POC are telling.
And I think that is a beautiful place for us to end today, that there are more stories for more people to start reading. We're going to ask you, one, where can people find you? And then there's one more piece I want you to read from Can You Sign My Tentacle?
Okay.
So where can people find you first?
I am almost everywhere on the internet at The Rising Tides. That's TheRisingTithes. I have a website that is also my newsletter at brandonobrien.xyz. And you can find most of the links to most of the stuff that I'm working on there as well. I do podcasting over at Speculate, which you can find more about at speculate.com. And at the Skiffy and Fanty show, where I talk a lot about science fiction and fantasy stuff, which you can find almost everyone on social media at Skiffy and Fanty. And I pretty much talk about all of the other things that I'm doing at one of those three places. So follow me on social media, and you will be bombarded with all of the other things that I do.
All right, perfect. And we'll try to have most of those lists in the show notes as well. So the piece I'd like you to probably close with, if you don't mind, is on page 27, Birthplace.
Aha. One of my favorites. I'm glad that you asked for this one.
I think it's a nice one to wrap up things with.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same. I wasn't gonna ask if you wanted me to read, but I'm glad that you asked me to read this one. So, I made this land myself. I put dirt in my own mouth and hoped it would mature. You made manure of the bodies of our mothers, asked us to chew the remains, and on our tongue they whispered, Babaluaye, make my children potters of a planet. Give them farmers' hands and turn their captors into meat for sand. I baked the soil myself. Let the dough of it roll in my first language so it would taste sweeter. Coated it in seeds of faith and made heat of my heart enough for home to cake around me. Your legacies already drowned me. You dragged me along water not fit for baptism, and my brothers swam anyway. Cold wind cracked their bones outside your windows, and our daughters grinned and took it. We asked Yamoja what rain would work to water a home, and she said, whatever sea is in your mouth will season your final island. Know that my landlords are greater than yours. I made this land myself, a recipe written in the heavens and taste tested by ancestors and peppered with ashes. Shade will one day grow in the place where your father's bones once called me low. I will plant a time I cannot see for children I will not know among those bones. And what grows, laughing, will not be as easy to pluck as I once was.
And with that, we close this episode of Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Brandon O'Brien, author of Can You Sign My Tentacle, and the piece of Birthplace, which you just heard. So thank you again for being on here, Brian. And I look forward to some stuff, which we'll talk about a bit off air. And we will be in touch for more to come this year. So stay tuned, folks, and be well.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.